They were legends, icons, unstoppable forces who lit up stages, screens, and runways. Their names echoed across generations. But behind the glamour, behind the applause and the lights, many of them carried a truth too dangerous to share. In a world that feared what it didn't understand, they were forced to suffer in silence. AIDS wasn't just a disease, it was a death sentence wrapped in stigma, shame, and isolation. Yet even in that silence, they left a message. Through their music, their films, their art, and their presence, they taught us something no headline ever could. That vulnerability is strength. That silence can still roar. That truth, once whispered, can shake the world. Today we honor 8 extraordinary lives, 8 voices who didn't just vanish, they changed the world on their way out. From the stadiums Freddie Mercury filled to the quiet courage of Pedro Zamora on national TV. From Keith Haring's blazing murals to the heartbreak hidden behind Rock Hudson's smile, each of them dared to exist at a time when existence itself was rebellion. This isn't just a story of loss, it's a story of bravery, and once you hear it, you won't forget. 1. Freddie Mercury. He wasn't just a singer, he was a force of nature. Freddie Mercury, the electrifying frontman of Queen, didn't simply perform, he commanded. With a 4-octave range, a theatrical stage presence, and a charisma that could light up an entire stadium, he became one of the most iconic voices in rock history. Songs like Bohemian Rhapsody, Somebody to Love, and We Are the Champions weren't just chart toppers, they were anthems of defiance, vulnerability, and unapologetic individuality. Born Farrokh Bulsara in Zanzibar, Freddie reinvented himself completely, not just musically, but personally. Though he never came out publicly during his lifetime, those closest to him knew the truth. His bond with Mary Austin, his former fiancée turned lifelong friend, and later with his partner Jim Hutton, revealed a man who sought love quietly while carrying the weight of global stardom. In 1987, Freddie was diagnosed with HIV. He kept it private, choosing instead to pour what time he had left into music. The haunting music video for These Are the Days of Our Lives, filmed shortly before his death, showed a visibly frail man. But his spirit burned as bright as ever. On November 23, 1991, Freddie released a public statement confirming he had AIDS. Less than 24 hours later, he was gone. But his voice never truly left. In 1992, the Mercury Phoenix Trust was established in his name, funding AIDS awareness and education globally. Freddie Mercury didn't just sing about champions, he lived like one. And even in death, he gave the world one final encore. It's Rock Hudson. To the world, Rock Hudson was the ideal leading man. Tall, square-jawed, impossibly handsome, he was the epitome of 1950s masculinity, starring in films like Giant, Pillow Talk, and Magnificent Obsession. Women adored him, men admired him, and studios built entire careers around his image. But behind that carefully crafted Hollywood persona was a man living a life split in two. Born Roy Harold Scherer Jr. in Illinois, Rock worked hard to climb the ranks of Hollywood, eventually becoming one of the most bankable stars of his time. But he was also gay in an era when being out wasn't just risky. It was career suicide. He married briefly under pressure from studio executives, but the facade couldn't last forever. In private circles, his sexuality was known, but publicly, he remained the picture of heterosexual charm. That all changed in July 1985. Gaunt and visibly ill, Rock's appearance at a press conference shocked fans and reporters. Days later, his publicist confirmed what many had only whispered. Rock Hudson had AIDS. It was a cultural earthquake. For the first time, the American public was forced to confront the reality of the disease. The myth that AIDS only affected certain marginalized groups shattered. Hudson's diagnosis gave the epidemic a face, familiar, beloved, and impossible to ignore. He died just months later, on October 2, 1985, at age 59. But in his final act, Rock Hudson did something no role ever demanded of him. He told the truth. And in doing so, he helped change how a nation saw the disease and the people living with it. Liberace glitter. He was a spectacle unto himself. With rhinestone-studded pianos, candelabras twinkling to the rhythm of classical melodies, and a wardrobe that could outshine the Las Vegas Strip, Liberace wasn't just an entertainer. He was a phenomenon. Born Waju Valentino Liberace in Wisconsin to working-class immigrant parents, he climbed from prodigy to global sensation, becoming one of the highest-paid performers in the world. Audiences adored his flamboyance, his showmanship, his charm. His homes were lavish, his stage persona even more so. But behind all that glitter was a man fiercely committed to hiding who he truly was. For decades, rumors swirled about his sexuality, intensified by his famously intimate relationship with a young chauffeur, Scott Thorson. Liberace denied everything, sometimes even under oath. In a world where being gay could destroy a career, he chose silence, reinforced by lawsuits, denial, and a carefully constructed public image. As the AIDS epidemic gripped the 1980s, Liberace's health began to decline. He grew thin, pale. He claimed it was due to a watermelon diet, but the truth could no longer be hidden. In 1987, at the age of 67, Liberace died. Initially, the cause of death was listed as heart failure. The autopsy later confirmed it. AIDS-related pneumonia. In death, as in life, his truth had to fight its way into the light. Liberace gave the world music, magic, and magnificence. But he also gave us a tragic lesson in how fame and fear can silence even the loudest of voices. That's Pedro Zamora. Long before social media and viral hashtags, there was a 22-year-old Cuban-American named Pedro Zamora who transformed reality television into something deeply real. When he joined the cast of The Real World, San Francisco in 1994, he didn't just bring his luggage, he brought a message. Pedro was openly gay, openly HIV positive, and unwavering in his mission to educate, humanize, and inspire. Born in Havana in 1972 and raised in Miami, Pedro was diagnosed with HIV at the age of 17. Most would have shrunk into the shadows. Pedro stepped into the spotlight. He became a national voice, speaking at schools, on panels, and eventually on MTV. His presence on The Real World wasn't for drama, it was for truth. Viewers watched him fall in love with his partner, Sean Sasser, and share their commitment ceremony on air, one of the first same-sex unions ever broadcast on American television. At a time when AIDS was still shrouded in fear and misinformation, Pedro gave it a face, a heart, a name. His health deteriorated rapidly during filming. Just hours after the final episode aired, Pedro Zamora passed away on November 11th, 1994. He was only 22 years old, but his impact was seismic. President Bill Clinton praised him publicly. Health education across America changed, and countless young people saw, maybe for the first time, that AIDS was not just a statistic, it was a human story. Pedro didn't just fight a disease, he changed how a country saw it. 5. Keith Haring. Keith Haring didn't need galleries. He didn't wait for permission. With bold lines and radiant figures, he transformed subway stations, city walls, and public spaces into canvases of resistance and joy. His art was instantly recognizable, playful on the surface, yet brimming with urgency, rebellion, and truth. Born in Pennsylvania in 1958, Haring exploded onto New York's street art scene with chalk in hand and a mission burning in his chest, to speak to the people, not above them. As his fame grew, Haring didn't pull back, he pushed forward. He used his art not for decoration, but for declaration. He painted about race, capitalism, sexuality, and most of all, life in the shadow of AIDS. In 1987, at just 29, he was diagnosed with HIV. But instead of retreating, he intensified his pace. He founded the Keith Haring Foundation, supporting AIDS awareness and children's programs. His work became sharper, more personal, more defiant. He painted with a clock ticking inside his body, racing against time. And yet, he never let the disease define him. Until the very end, Keith Haring turned pain into purpose, transforming fear into color. He died in 1990 at just 31 years old, but his legacy never stopped moving. It dances across murals, pulses through classrooms, and stares back from museum walls as if to say, I was here, I mattered, and so do you. Brad Davis. Brad Davis was intensity personified. With piercing eyes and a raw, restless energy, he didn't just act, he inhabited every role. Audiences saw it clearly in Midnight Express. where his portrayal of a tortured American prisoner in a Turkish jail earned him a Golden Globe and international acclaim. But behind that magnetic screen presence was a man carrying battles far heavier than any character he ever played. Born in Florida in 1949, Davis rose quickly in the acting world. He was a devoted husband to actress Susan Bluestein and a loving father. But off-camera, his life was a whirlwind of contradictions. He struggled with addiction and demons that no script could contain. In 1985, he was diagnosed with AIDS. He told almost no one, not even many of his closest colleagues. He kept acting, kept auditioning, carrying the weight of a stigma that could have crushed his career in an instant. But Brad Davis refused to let the disease write his ending. In 1991, at just 41 years old, he made a devastatingly personal choice. With his wife's support, he ended his life through assisted suicide, taking back control from a world that had already taken too much. His final act wasn't one of surrender, but of defiance, a refusal to be remembered as a victim. Brad Davis didn't just perform with honesty. He lived and died with it too. 7. Anthony Perkins. To moviegoers, Anthony Perkins will forever be remembered as Norman Bates, the shy, unsettling motel clerk from Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, a role that redefined horror and etched itself into cinematic history. But the character's duality, the gentle surface masking something darker, mirrored Perkins' own life more closely than most ever knew. Born in 1932 to a theatrical family, Anthony lost his father at just 5 years old, leaving him yearning for direction and identity. Hollywood found him early, casting him in sensitive, introspective roles that earned critical acclaim and even an Oscar nomination for Friendly Persuasion. But beneath the rising fame was a young man constantly hiding who he really was. In an industry ruled by image, Perkins lived in fear of exposure. He dated women publicly and eventually married photographer Barry Berenson, with whom he had 2 sons. But his earlier relationships, particularly with fellow actor Tab Hunter, remained secret, buried under studio pressure and societal expectations. By the late 1980s, Perkins was diagnosed with HIV. True to form, he kept his illness a secret, continuing to work quietly while the disease progressed. On September 12, 1992, he died of AIDS-related pneumonia at age 60. The world mourned the loss of a legendary actor. Only later did it begin to understand the silent burden he carried. In a cruel twist, his wife Barry Berenson would also meet a tragic end aboard American Airlines Flight 11 during the September 11th attacks. Their story is a haunting echo of lives lived behind curtains, curtains drawn not just on stage, but over truths too painful for their time. 8. Willie Smith. Willie Smith wasn't just a fashion designer, he was a revolutionary with fabric. Born in Philadelphia in 1948, Smith had a vision few others saw at the time, that fashion didn't have to live on runways or behind velvet ropes. It could live on the streets, in everyday movement, worn by the people who make the world turn. In 1976, he launched Willie Wear, a brand that fused high fashion with street style, making bold prints, loose silhouettes, and comfort not just stylish, but empowering. His approach was radical. While others catered to the elite, Willie said, "I don't design for the queen, I design for the people who wave at her." And the people responded. By the mid-1980s, Willie Wear was earning over $25 million a year, and Smith was collaborating across art, theater, and dance. He designed the wedding dress for Mary Jane Watson in Spider-Man, proving pop culture had a seat at his table too. But behind the vibrant colors and easy charisma was a man suffering in silence. Smith never publicly acknowledged his illness. Even as his health declined rapidly, he stayed out of the spotlight. In 1987, at just 39 years old, he died from AIDS-related complications. The fashion world lost one of its brightest minds, and perhaps its most generous soul. Willie Smith didn't just redefine how we dress. He reimagined who fashion is for. And though his time was cut short, his vision still walks beside us today, bold, joyful, and unapologetically alive. They came from different worlds, rock arenas, film sets, art studios, political stages. But they were united by a shared truth. They lived in a time when being honest about who they were could cost them everything. Some never said a word. Others screamed their truth into the world's silence. And all of them, in the end, left behind more than their talents. They left behind a legacy of courage. Freddie Mercury gave voice to a generation learning how to mourn out loud. Rock Hudson shattered illusions with a single diagnosis. Liberace made the world fall in love with showmanship, even as he hid behind the curtain. Pedro Zamora turned his final years into a classroom that taught a nation compassion. Keith Haring drew with urgency and purpose, turning the pain of his diagnosis into art that still speaks. Brad Davis, in his final act, demanded dignity on his own terms. Anthony Perkins carried the weight of a hidden life in silence. And Willie Smith showed us that creativity doesn't need permission. It needs heart. They were artists, icons, trailblazers. But they were also human. Fragile, resilient, afraid, defiant. Their deaths from AIDS weren't just personal tragedies. They were public reckonings that forced the world to see, to feel, and eventually to change. So today we remember not how they died, but how they lived, loudly, beautifully, unforgettably.